On June 6, 1992, a graduation ceremony was held in Springfield, Missouri, at the Hammond Student Center, an 8,846-seat multi-purpose arena on the campus of Southwest Missouri State University. It was a Saturday, and the Kickapoo High School event was attended by 18-year-old Stacy Kathleen McCall and 19-year-old Suzanne Elizabeth Streeter. Everyone was happy, smiling, taking photos, and chatting about the future. They were posing for countless shots with relatives and schoolmates, and they were getting tired of smiling after a while. But Stacy was still excited to meet with the senior students that evening. There were numerous graduation parties in the area that night, and the two girls decided to visit a few to celebrate their latest achievement. The ceremony ended at 6 p.m., and after receiving their diplomas, they left the campus and went home separately to change and prepare for the night. At 7:30 p.m., Nigel Kenny, one of Susie's friends, dropped off a white graduation cake for her at 1717 East Delmar Street in Springfield, and she spent the early part of the evening having a take-home pizza with her mother, 47-year-old Cheryl Elizabeth Levitt. They had a special bond, thus the daughter even pondered canceling the plans to spend time with her mother, the only relative she had with her at the ceremony. Stacy was also at home for a short time, but the McCalls decided the celebration could wait one more day. Her graduation present was a bouncy white Cocker Spaniel puppy named Bubba, who would wait for her to return home the next day. The friends gathered at Janelle Kirby's house on 4881 South Butterfield Place in Battlefield, near West Coach Drive, about 10.7 miles southwest of Streeter's residence. Susie reached there at 8:15 p.m. and Stacy at 8:30 p.m., and they went to a nearby party at 5002 Coach Drive hosted by Brian Joy, another schoolmate. The girls initially planned to stay at a hotel in Branson overnight, about 50 miles south of Springfield, and then visit the Whitewater Amusement Park with a larger group in the morning. However, 2 hours later, at 10:30 p.m., Stacy phoned her mother, Janice McCall, and informed her that she and Susie decided to spend the night at Janelle's home in Battlefield and wouldn't drive to Branson because they would probably party late, and she also promised to call in the morning before leaving. It was quite a relief for Janice and Stu McCall, who had feared a car accident would happen to them, because on the night of their own graduation decades earlier, 2 of their friends were killed in a traffic accident. Sometime before 1 a.m., the teens went to another party at 1535 East Hanover Street in Springfield, 8.2 miles east of Kirby's house, where Michelle Elder, a friend of McCall, hosted graduates. They left their cars at Janelle's home and rode with others. They arrived around 1:30 a.m., but left 20 minutes later because the police had broken up the party due to a neighbor's report. By then, Susie complained of a growing stomachache. She had already felt it when she left home and told the group it was most likely from the pizza. Shortly before 2 a.m., they returned to Brian Joy's residence in Battlefield. Some sources state the boy had earlier offered them to spend the night at his place, but allegedly recanted it. However, it wouldn't make much sense because the girls had already planned to stay at the Kirby residence, and Stacy even told her mother about it. Janelle's mother, Kathy, had even laid out a pallet on the living room floor for them, while her daughter was about to sleep on the couch. But because the house was overcrowded with out-of-town relatives from Kansas, Streeter and McCall chose to drive back to the former's home, where she lived with only her mother. Suzanne was also excited to show Stacy her new king-size waterbed, a graduation gift from Cheryl, so they left Battlefield in separate vehicles. The girls arrived at East Delmar Street sometime around 2:15 a.m., and that's when the real mystery began, because something truly sinister happened between 2:30 and 8 a.m. We know that a friend called Cheryl at 11:15 p.m. while she was varnishing a chair and painting a drawer, and she made no indication that anything was wrong. Since the early hours of June 7th, the 3 Springfield women have shown no signs of life, and surprisingly, the neighbors did not see any suspicious activity near Cheryl's home during the overnight hours. It seemed like they had vanished into thin air. The classmates planned to speak with Janelle at 8 a.m. to arrange their meeting time for Branson, but her calls remained unanswered. Janelle and Nagiel Holderby, Susie's best friend, tried multiple times ringing up the home, but with no different outcome. Kirby left a message nonetheless, and on their way to the water park, she and her boyfriend, Mike Henson, stopped by East Delmar Street to see if everything was okay. It wasn't. They arrived at around 9 a.m., and they found each of the women's cars, Cheryl's blue Mitsubishi Eclipse, Susie's red Ford Escort with the personalized license plate Sweeter, and Stacy's red Toyota Corolla parked outside on the Circle Drive, implying that they were probably home. They saw a shattered glass lampshade on the porch, though the light bulb was untouched and burning. Unfortunately, the first major mistake was made at this point, because the teenage couple swept the broken glass off the porch and threw it in a dumpster across the street. Henson later said they did it because they knew Cheryl wouldn't like it, and Janelle stepped out of their car barefooted. Springfield police later determined that they might have destroyed potential evidence. First they knocked, but no answer. They found the door unlocked, so they slowly turned the doorknob and entered the house, but found no one inside. All the trio's belongings were there, along with Susie's dog, a Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, who appeared anxious and immediately jumped into the girl's arms. Janelle walked around the backyard, thinking her friends might be sunbathing. According to Springfield Branson National Airport's databases, on June 7th, the weather was pleasant, with a peak temperature of 79 degrees Fahrenheit, or 26.1 degrees Celsius at 5 p.m. During their visit at 9 a.m., it was 67 degrees Fahrenheit, or 19.4 degrees Celsius. An 8-mile-per-hour gentle northeast breeze was blowing outside, and the sky was mostly cloudy the whole day. They checked everything, but nothing seemed amiss. Susie's bed covers were pulled back, but nothing unusual for a teenager. As they were leaving the house, the phone started ringing. Kirby answered, and an unidentified male made sexual innuendos. The girl hung up immediately, but the phone rang again, and again a male voice told various obscene things, seasoned with a lot of F-words. Janelle and Mike then went to a friend's house to see if Susie and Stacy had stopped by before meeting for the trip to Branson, but their friend Shane hadn't seen the girls. They returned to East Delmar Street one more time, but no miracle happened. They even checked a neighborhood shop to see if they walked there for food, but again, they found nothing. The couple eventually left Streeter's house and decided to visit Springfield's Hydroslide Water Park instead of the initially planned White Water Park in Branson. Time passed, but the three women gave no signs of life. It was a Sunday, so it wasn't that unusual, but Stacy's mother, Janice, grew concerned after her daughter did not answer the phone. The early 90s were the cradle of the internet, and cell phones weren't nearly as common as today, but still, she promised her mother she'd check in. At 10:30 a.m., Janice phoned the Kirby residence and learned from Janelle's sister that the schoolmates had not stayed there for the night, which surprised Mrs. McCall even more. Janice had acquaintances who knew Whitewater employees, and she became even more panicked after they confirmed that Susie and Stacy had not been seen there. Not entirely sure when, but sometime during the afternoon on June 7th, the mother also went to Streeter's house to check on the trio. She returned from a family gathering at Lake Springfield with one of his elder daughters, and when she entered the house, Cinnamon came barreling towards her. The dog was in there just going crazy, just yipping and crying, Janice told True Crime News later. She found their purses with the IDs inside on the floor, next to the stairs leading into Susie's sunken bedroom, where the girl's bikini for the next day's water park was laid out. Levitt's wallet still contained a cash deposit of over $900 from her work. In the bedroom, Stacy's flowered shorts were neatly folded with some jewelry stuffed into the pockets, and she placed them on her sandals next to Streeter's waterbed. Those were the only clothes she had with her. The situation was extremely worrying, and it wasn't over yet. Janice discovered more jewelry on the wash basin and recently used damp clothes tossed in the hamper, indicating that the girls washed off their makeup. The graduation cake with "Congrats Suze" written on it was still in the fridge untouched, and she found the car and house keys as well, which also suggested the two graduates had arrived at Delmar Street and were about to go to bed. Another puzzling finding was Susie and Cheryl's cigarettes and lighters, because mother and daughter were both chain smokers. They took tobacco with them everywhere, and friends recalled Cheryl smoking a cigarette as one of the first things she did when she woke up. If they had gone somewhere together, leaving such things behind feels quite unrealistic, given their smoking habits. In the girls' room, there was an unfinished can of Coke next to the cigarette, and the television was showing snow, suggesting they might have watched a movie on VHS but never turned it off after it was finished. Or they weren't in the house by then. However, some sources state that the 19-year-old frequently turned on the device when sleeping. The scene indicated the girls had safely returned home, finished using the bathroom, and probably started watching something on television. The drink and cigarette also suggest that Susie wasn't planning to go to the porch for another smoke. But why were the purses on the floor? Janice initially didn't want to call the police because she expected the girls to walk in any minute. And during the afternoon, 18 friends and family members came to the house asking about the trio's whereabouts. While patiently waiting for their return, visitors cleaned up the house, emptied ashtrays, washed the dishes, repaired a weirdly bent window blind, and called acquaintances from Cheryl's phone book. It was already getting darker outside, and nearly a day had passed since they were last seen when Janice finally decided to call the police from the home telephone. At 8:48 p.m., she reported them missing to Officer Rick Bookout, who ran the overnight shift. After placing the call, while checking the answering machine, she listened to a sexually explicit message, but unfortunately, it was accidentally erased by the careless hand of a visitor. When the 3-year veteran Officer Bookout arrived, he could still smell the varnish Cheryl had used. By then, Janelle and Mike had returned from Hydroslide. The policeman first talked to the McCall parents, who brought him up to speed. They then walked through the house, and soon Officer Brian Galt was also called to the scene. They concluded that it was a missing persons case and foul play was suspected. However, police later stated that by tidying up, the worrying visitors ultimately corrupted the scene to such an extent that they most likely destroyed many valuable pieces of evidence. Officer Bookout and Galt interviewed everyone in the house and even asked Janice for Stacy's dental records, which she thought was because they believed the girls could be dead and identification would be necessary soon. Except for the shattered porch light, investigators found no evidence of struggle, forced entry, or other indication of a crime. Levitt's bed appeared to be slept in, and all personal belongings, including purses, money, cars, keys, cigarettes, and the family dog Cinnamon, were left behind. The mother had a doctor's appointment scheduled for Monday. McCall was supposed to work that day as well, while Streeter was also expected to work on Tuesday at 4 p.m. None of the women arrived. The Springfield trio vanished without a trace, and no one has seen them since. The missing persons report number 9240169 was filed at 2:50 a.m. on June 8th. Upon leaving, Officer Bookout left a small blue note on the door with a handwritten message. When you get in, please call 864-1810 and cancel the missing persons report. (1992) was a remarkable year in the United States in many ways. George H.W. Bush and Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton were running for the presidency. Notorious mob boss John Gotti was convicted of murdering rival mafioso Paul Castellano, and The Silence of the Lambs won Best Picture at the 64th Academy Awards. End of the Road by Boyz II Men was the #1 hit song of the year. Metallica was climbing the charts, and hoop earrings became trendy among girls. However, 1992 was also the year when one of the most famous true crime mysteries occurred, the case of the Springfield 3. The entire disappearance is almost as perplexing as the vanishing of the Sodder children in 1945 when 5 siblings went missing in one night after a house fire. Springfield was a city of 140,000 in 1992 and is now the state's 3rd most populous city. It is known by several nicknames, including Queen City of the Ozarks and the birthplace of Route 66. Springfield is generally considered a good place to live for families because of its mainly friendly community and high standard of living. Yet crime rates are awful, according to recent FBI statistics. In 2022, Springfield's crime rates were 172.2% higher than the national average, and the 2 main categories were violent crime and property crime. There were a total of 2,408 violent crimes in the city, 1,418 per 100,000 people, which is 283.4% higher than the national average, and a total of 8,336 property crimes, 4,909 per 100,000 residents, which was 151.2% higher than the average, all in 1 year. To put the period in perspective, the FBI's Uniform Crime Report shows that in 1992, Missouri had 38,000 violent crimes, including 547 murders, and 226,000 property crimes, including 57,000 burglaries. So we can say that even back then, there was room for improvement. Susie worked for a few months at a Springfield health club, and in February 1992, she started working at a local movie theater and planned to enroll in a cosmetology school in the fall of that year. She wanted to follow in her mother's footsteps, who was a hairdresser at New Attitudes Hair Salon at 210 West Sunshine Street in the middle of the city. Cheryl was considered a model employee who had 250 clients and was a very cautious and precise person. She was a single mother to Bart and Suzanne and divorced twice. She was close with her daughter, who had never lived with her father and rarely spoke about him or her stepfather. Susie's father was Cheryl's first husband, Brent Streeter, whom she married in 1964 and divorced in 1973, shortly after the girl was born. She married Don Levitt in 1980, and they relocated to Springfield together. They separated in 1989, after which the man returned to Seattle and remarried. I found sources claiming that Don Levitt accumulated some debts, and his creditors pressured Cheryl to pay even after their divorce. She hired an attorney to locate him, but without success. The mother grew up in Seattle, Washington, and they moved to Springfield when Susie was just 7. They bought the East Delmar Street house in a safer part of the city in April 1992, just 2 months before the vanishing. She purchased the home on a contract arrangement and was fixing it up. For instance, she installed deadbolt locks on the doors. People described Cheryl as a private person who enjoyed decorating her new home. Even during the last call, she was varnishing a chair, and after the ceremony, she went home to hang a wallpaper border. Despite Cheryl's close bond with Susie, her relationship with her son was sometimes turbulent, but we will get to that soon. At the time of her disappearance, Stacy McCall was employed as a secretary and receptionist at the Springfield Gymnastics Center Health Club and planned to attend Southwest Missouri State University in the fall of 1992. She and Janelle were best friends since they were toddlers, as they lived near each other, and Janelle's mother, Kathy, watched Stacy when she was 3 or 4. They were both accepted to the university and intended to room together and pledged to the Alpha Chi Omega sorority. Stacy lived with her parents, Janice and Stu McCall. She loved fashion and modeled wedding gowns for the Total Bride in the Brentwood Center, a business owned by family friends. Both girls dated occasionally, but neither had a boyfriend at the time, and neither of them had any reason to leave everything behind, as they had plans to study and build a career. Suzanne was born on March 9, 1973. She was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 102 pounds at the time of her vanishing. She had shoulder-length bleached blonde hair and brown eyes, and she could be distinguished by a scar on her upper right forearm and a small tumor on the left corner of her mouth. She had large-sized teeth with no previous dental work, and both of her ears were pierced, but the left ear was pierced twice. She may have been dyslexic. Friends described her as an outgoing, fun person who was last seen wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and pink shoes. She had a close but sometimes troubled relationship with Cheryl. Susie even moved out of her mother's home twice. Friends said, like most teenagers, Susie also wanted more independence. In the summer of 1991, for example, she lived for 3 months with her boyfriend, Mike Kovach. In September, however, she returned and petitioned Greene County Circuit Court for a restraining order against him, alleging that he had threatened and harassed her and slashed her tires, which he denied. In the spring of 1992, Susie again moved out of East Delmar Street to live with her brother, but she returned about 2 weeks later after an argument over his partying habits. She liked to dress in hip fashion, including torn jeans and wild hats. Friends recalled that any time the 19-year-old arrived home, she always went into her mother's room to check in and tell her she was home safe. Stacy McCall was born on April 23, 1974. She was 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 120 pounds. She had long, dark blonde hair and blue eyes. Stacy suffered from migraine headaches and required medication to relieve the pain, but left her prescription in her handbag at Levitt's house. She had a tanned complexion, freckles adorned her face, and the sun had lightened the ends of her hair. Stacy's ears were also pierced, and she had an off-center cleft in her chin and birthmarks on her chin near her lip and on her right arm. She last wore a yellow shirt, had a 14-karat gold necklace, a gold ring with her initials, and a small diamond ring. The girls had been friends since grade school, but with time, they went with different friend groups. Susie was described as the popular girl in school, while Stacy hung out with the goofy crowd. Her parents said Stacy was also popular in Kickapoo and had good grades but did not participate in many school activities. Susie was added to Stacy and Janelle's circle in 2nd grade when she was held back, and that's why she is older. Once the McCalls moved out of state when Stacy was 11, the three separated for a few years. When she returned, everything changed, as Janelle described later. Instead of 3, it was typically 2. Sometimes Janelle and Stacy, sometimes Janelle and Susie, but Janelle was the glue for the 3. However, a few months before the graduation, they restored their childhood friendship. Cheryl was born on November 1, 1944. She was 5 feet tall and 110 pounds. She had bleached blonde hair and brown eyes, just like her daughter, had freckles on her neck and upper chest, her ears pierced, and her maiden name was Williams. The investigators were baffled by the strange and unusual scene. There was no evidence of struggle. It appeared that the 3 women simply walked out of the house. Authorities had little to work with. The lewd message had been deleted, and because of the cleaning, they couldn't collect fingerprints and DNA, even though DNA examinations only became available in Missouri in 1995. However, Nigel Kenny, a co-worker and close friend of Susie, noted that she was a creature of habit, almost OCD to some degree, and very particular about parking her vehicle in the same spot in the residence's driveway. Kenny believed that since Streeter's car was not in the carport as usual, someone else might have parked in her spot when she and McCall arrived in the early hours of June 7th. But perhaps she didn't care much about the parking because they came in pitch darkness and exhausted. Or she just wanted to show Stacy where to park because she was following her all the way from Battlefield. And if Susie had parked in the carport with Stacy behind her, Cheryl wouldn't have been able to leave in the morning if she wanted to. Regarding the phone calls, Streeter had been complaining about prank calls since moving in. Janelle Kirby later said that the rude caller gave her a teenish impression, which might imply that some immature boys may have had a crush on the attractive 19-year-old. In addition to her untouched belongings, Cheryl's room had her glasses by her bed and a book turned over, suggesting that someone may have interrupted her while reading. The lights were off in the house, but 2 slats in the window blinds in Susie's room had been separated, as if someone was looking out. What if a strange noise from outside alerted them? For example, the shattering of the porch light globe. Considering that Stacy's only clothes were inside the home, the police believed that she might have left East Delmar Street in just underwear and a shirt because she wouldn't fit in Susie's dresses. It's likely that Levitt and Streeter also left wearing only their bedclothes, suggesting they vanished only after they had already undressed for bed. Springfield police assigned 30 officers to the case, divided into 2 teams. Each team worked 12-hour shifts, and even the department's crisis action team had been called in. On June 9th, the FBI also joined the search and assigned an agent to the case, investigating the disappearance as potentially the work of a serial killer. Police Chief Terry Knowles declared the women almost certainly did not intend to disappear. Retired Springfield Police Captain Tony Glenn said, "The only thing unusual about this house was that 3 women were missing from it. You had this feeling as you looked around that something was missing, that something had to be missing, but there wasn't, just them." The authorities suspected the case was a serial crime and conducted extensive searches in the region, and the highly unusual disappearances quickly gained nationwide attention, prompting reporters to gather around the house. On December 31st, 1992, a man called America's Most Wanted hotline with information about the women's disappearances, but the call was disconnected when the switchboard operator attempted to link up with Springfield detectives. Police stated the caller could have prime knowledge of the abductions and urged the man to contact them, but he never did. However, it must be noted that such calls are common in most cases, with the vast majority being pranks, attention-seeking, or absolutely useless. Police Chief Terry Knowles told the news leader on September 6th that the case had taken a toll on them and left them with little to no social life. Maybe I'm not able to do certain things I wanted to do, but also, they don't have a daughter that they used to have. So the reality of that puts it in quick perspective, and I'm not so concerned about things I used to do, he added. Detective David Asher said the first 3 months of the investigation felt like a year to them. Since 1992, officials have received over 10,000 tips, followed leads into 21 states, and compiled over 27,000 documents. Friends, relatives, and the community were also involved, with whom police searched forests, canals, sewers, Lake Springfield, and a stretch of the James River with 6 divers, rode horses, and walked through fields of tall grass. But nothing turned up, and not one lead became fruitful. 20,000 posters were placed nationwide on telephone poles, store windows, restaurants, bus stops, truck stops, and many other places, again without success. On June 12th, police called for the public's help in locating 2 stolen vehicles that were taken the night the trio went missing. One was a burgundy Toyota Supra with the Missouri license plate LTS 217 that was stolen from the Battlefield Mall parking lot. The other vehicle was a dark blue 19-foot Dodge van that had been converted into a motorhome. In the early stages of the investigation, police were also looking for a third vehicle taken from one of the classmates of the girls who lived across the McCalls on East Meadowlark Street. The car was stolen from a parking lot on East Sunshine Street and was described as a 1991 red Chevrolet Cavalier with Missouri license AKF 496. The police weren't sure whether the theft was connected to the disappearances, but they had to investigate regardless. They even dug up anthills at Lake Springfield, which callers thought could be fresh graves. They chased circling buzzards, hoping to find a clue. Lead number 15,416. There are buzzards flying over some silo or something. They would send people, said former Springfield police detective and current Bolivar Police Chief Mark Webb in 2022. They collected, tagged, and stored every possible piece of evidence. For example, a large pair of women's underwear floating in Lake Springfield. It was so big, all 3 women could have fit inside, but still. In 1992, an anonymous caller told Springfield news station KY3 that a letter containing information about their whereabouts was placed inside a newspaper stand. It was found in an envelope and they cut the words out just like in the movies, Webb added, but it was useless once again. Multiple rewards were established. The Boatmen's National Bank of Springfield created a fund where everyone could donate. Crime Stoppers offered $1,000 for information, and local radio stations KGBX and KCMY offered a one-time reward of $10,000. Investigators received a tip that the women were buried in the foundations of the south parking garage at Cox Hospital, 4.3 miles south of the house. In 2007, crime reporter Kathy Baird invited mechanical engineer Rick Norland to scan a corner of the parking garage at South National Avenue and Primrose Street with ground-penetrating radar. Norland discovered 3 anomalies roughly the same size that he said were consistent with a grave site location. 2 of the anomalies were parallel, and the other was perpendicular. However, the police claimed the informant provided no evidence or logical reasoning behind this theory at that time or since then. Skeptics also pointed out that those radars cannot detect in such an environment. Furthermore, SPD highlighted that the construction began more than a year after their disappearances, and that digging up the area and subsequently reconstructing this structure would be extremely costly, and without any reasonable belief that the bodies could be located here, it is illogical to do so, and for those reasons, SPD does not intend to. Investigators have determined this lead to not be credible. Daryl Moore, a former assistant and prosecuting attorney at the Greene County Prosecutor's Office, said the tip came from someone who either claimed to be a psychic or claimed to have a dream or vision about the case. There were numerous suspects in the case, including Bart Streeter, Susie's brother, who was 27 years old when his family disappeared. His relationship with his mother and sibling was often difficult. They weren't even on speaking terms before Cheryl and Susie relocated to Springfield. However, he had a rock-solid alibi for the night, also confirmed by his girlfriend at the time and neighbors, and passed a polygraph test on June 11th. He left the city in the subsequent period, but in 2019 he was arrested on suspicion of public intoxication, disorderly conduct, and attempted false imprisonment in Tennessee. Another suspect was Dustin Rekla, Suzanne's former boyfriend, who stole $30 worth of gold fillings with two of his friends from a skull in a Springfield mausoleum a few months before the tragic evening. Susie was disgusted by the desecration and instantly broke up with Rekla. She had given investigators a statement about the break-in and was considered a potential witness against Rekla in court. He was a known drug user with ties to the Galloping Goose Motorcycle Club, a notorious organization often associated with both violence and crime. After the three went missing, detectives began digging into the trio's backgrounds and found that Suzanne had several books on Satanism and devil worship, which was an extremely unusual interest for an apparently normal young woman. Perhaps her strange boyfriend had such an influence on her. The three men allegedly used Susie's car in the grave robbery, and her possible testimony posed a threat to their freedom. Furthermore, they were known to be together in the area the night the three women went missing. However, they also had an alibi, claiming that they were at a concert, and the police pointed out that they were cooperating during the investigation. In December 1992, one of the accomplices, Joseph Riedel, testified about the robbery, and all three got probation and community service eventually. Worth noting that it is quite unlikely that such petty robbers would leave valuables and cash behind in a house, and killing one of the key witnesses to a criminal case would just draw more attention to them. The next one is Steve Garrison, a friend of Rekla and a member of the motorcycle gang. In 1993, police arrested him for brutally beating a female student, but in exchange for a plea deal, he offered information regarding the Springfield 3 case. Garrison claimed he overheard someone at a party confessing to the murder. His testimony led investigators to two locations where he said they would find the victims and a green van. On August 28, 1993, police searched a farm near Northview, Missouri, as well as another 40 acres of land in Webster County in a different location. One of those was owned by a certain Francis Robb Sr., who was convicted of 2 murders in 1990. Robb pleaded guilty to the 1989 second-degree murder of 34-year-old Mary Susan Thomas and 35-year-old Daniel Davison. The news leader reported that along with Davison's brother John, they were drinking and using drugs with Robb in Robb's mobile home on the night of the murders. After the man killed them, he burned their bodies and scattered their ashes through Webster County. John Davison was slain by another man named Mark Batson, and none of their remains were ever found. A female informant told police the Springfield 3 were also buried by Francis Robb, who died on October 6, 1995. What the authorities discovered is unknown and protected under a gag order, but since no announcement followed the search, we may infer that nothing relating to the trio was found. The main suspect was a man named Robert Craig Cox, a convicted robber, kidnapper, and murderer. He was imprisoned in Texas for aggravated robbery in 1995 after robbing a woman and a 12-year-old child with a gun and attempting to enter a young woman's residence. The court convicted him to life in prison with the chance of parole in 2025. In 1997, 5 years after the disappearances, he told investigative reporter Dennis Graves that he knew the 3 women had been murdered and buried, and claimed their remains would never be recovered. Moreover, his connection to the case deepens because in 1992, he resided in Springfield and previously worked at the same car dealership as Stacy's father. Initially, he had a strong alibi for the morning of June 7th, claiming he was at church with his girlfriend. The woman originally confirmed this, but surprisingly, she later recanted in front of a grand jury, stating that Cox had asked her to say that. He also stated that he was with his parents the night the trio went missing, and they corroborated this. Authorities were uncertain whether Cox was involved in the vanishing or if he was seeking attention by making false statements. He even told detectives and journalists that he would disclose what happened to the 3 women, but only after his mother died. He came to the attention of the police after the parents of 19-year-old Sharon Zellers, who was slain in Orlando, Florida, alerted SPD that Cox was in town. In 1978, the man was a well-trained Army Ranger stationed in Georgia, and he was even named Soldier of the Year. The same year, while he was on vacation with his parents in Florida, the young girl was kidnapped, raped, and killed. Sharon was a full-of-life and happy 19-year-old who wasn't ready for college, but enjoyed working at Walt Disney World's Frontierland Trading Post gift shop. She wasn't supposed to work on December 30th, 1978, but when someone called in sick, she agreed to go in. She left the park at 10 p.m., but never arrived home. 5 days later, authorities discovered her lifeless, badly beaten body stuffed in a dumping company sewer. Cox wasn't charged until 1988, but the jury eventually convicted him. However, the Supreme Court of Florida overturned the verdict in 1990, citing insufficient evidence against him because the DNA samples were questionable. This meant that he evaded death row, but upon his release, California immediately took him into custody to serve his prison sentence for an unrelated 1985 kidnapping and assault of a woman. Later, he moved back to Springfield to live with his parents. Sharon Zeller's parents were certain all along that Cox was responsible for her death. They continued to track him, and when they saw the news about the 3 missing women, they suspected he was behind it. So if the parents hadn't informed Springfield police, they wouldn't have known that a convicted kidnapper and suspected murderer was walking the streets of Springfield. The $42,000 reward for information about the Springfield Three's whereabouts is still in effect today. In 2002, investigators went to a concrete company, again in Webster County, after 2 women reported seeing men driving a green van that resembled the one wanted by authorities. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search 3 locations, and bones were recovered, but the examination revealed that it was far too old to belong to the trio. In April 2003, tips led detectives to a farmland south of Cassville. They excavated vast holes with backhoes, but only discovered 2 pieces of possible evidence: traces of blood and the section of a green vehicle. Perhaps the green van witnesses say they saw back in 1992. Investigators submitted the blood evidence to a specialized lab, but the results were inconclusive. In 2015, Daryl Moore told a journalist that they receive 100 tips a year from various sources. He also added that although it would have been impossible to obtain a court order to dig up the previously mentioned hospital parking lot, they had been able to dig in several locations since the disappearance. One of these was in a cave east of Springfield in Webster County, and another was also on a farm in Berry County, southwest of the city. They tore up the floor of an abandoned building, for example, and dug inside and outside, but unfortunately, nothing turned up. In another instance, a psychic called to say the bodies were in a blanket buried near water, Moore recalled. Numerous sightings focused on unidentified vehicles. Several people reported seeing a brown 2-door Dodge van near the house with rust along the sides and bottom, and no side or rear windows. The van was spotted at the Signal food store on the corner of East Grand and South Glenstone in the early hours of June 7th, around 4:30 a.m., and a similar vehicle was also seen parking near a dentist's office on June 3rd and 4th. Shortly before 7 a.m., residents saw an older avocado green Dodge panel van about 2 miles from Streeter's home. A female caller reported that while sitting on her porch enjoying the sunrise in East Springfield, she overheard a male voice yelling from the backseat to a terrified female driver who matched Susie's description. The witness claimed the green van pulled into the driveway next door, and the man said, "Don't do anything stupid." Unfortunately, she did not report it for several days because she was too scared to come forward. Similar sightings of such a van were reported throughout the city as well. One man told police he was sitting in a grocery store parking lot near Levitt's East Delmar home when he observed a van with a young blonde in the driver's seat as she was waiting on someone in the store. He jotted down the license plate on a newspaper because he thought there was something strange about the vehicle. Unfortunately, he had thrown the newspaper away, and when the police had him hypnotized, he could remember only the first 3 characters. Others stated they heard screeching of tires and screams on the morning of June 7th. This is somewhat in line with the theory the police maintained for the longest time. This suggests that a single individual could have been responsible for the entire disappearance, either by forcing or tricking the three women into leaving the house immediately. Authorities believe it could have been such a trick if an unknown person posing as a utility worker warned of a bogus gas leak in the neighborhood to lure them out. This could explain why they left the clothes and all the important personal belongings behind. This theory becomes much more intriguing if we know that in the summer of 1992, Robert Cox worked as a utility locator at SM&P Conduit in South Central Springfield. In 2006, the man sent a letter from prison to the Springfield News Leader, in which he claimed he did such jobs around the city, including the vicinity of the house of Cheryl Levitt. However, in the years before the letter, he also claimed he did not remember having worked there. All our eggs are not in Cox's basket. We're still looking at lots of different people. If tomorrow we had a lead and solved this case, and it wasn't Cox, I wouldn't be surprised. Sergeant Mike Owen, one of the detectives who was working on the case, commented. The other part of the trick theory is that some rumors suggested that neighbors might have seen the dog outside around 3 a.m. It was theorized that the kidnapper or kidnappers may have used the dog as a ruse to gain access to the building. Neighbors and other residents of the area also told officers that they had seen an unknown transient with shoulder-length brown hair and a full beard around the house in the days preceding the events. They described him as white, between the ages of 34 and 38, about 5 feet 9 inches tall, and weighing approximately 145 pounds. The police tried to find him and circulated a sketch in the press, but they were unsuccessful. Then came June 24, 1992, when a waitress at George's Steakhouse on 339 South Glenstone Avenue, one of Cheryl Levitt's favorite restaurants, claimed she saw the three women in the diner sometime between 2 and 3 a.m. This most likely could have happened after 2 in the morning, because the girls left Battlefield at 2 a.m. The waitress claimed the trio arrived and left together, and that Susie appeared giddy, perhaps intoxicated, and her mom tried to calm her down. However, the police haven't confirmed this sighting, and it came more than 2 weeks after the case went viral in the national media. And given that Suzanne complained about a growing stomachache all night, it seems unlikely she consumed much alcohol. Steve Thompson, a convenience store clerk, stated that around 10:30 p.m., Streeter and McCall entered his shop, the Abco A-Mart at 4140 South Fremont Avenue, and bought some items. The 24-year-old man said he remembered Susie because they made good eye contact. He said Stacy arrived in a large light brown or dark gold car, and they left in separate vehicles going in opposite directions. But this was disputed by Janelle and other friends, who said the girls were with them at the parties between 8:30 p.m. and 2 a.m., and they never left. On June 21st, the Springfield News Leader wrote that the same convenience store clerk claimed that on June 7th at 2:15 a.m., Cheryl rushed in to ask if her daughter and 2 friends had been there. The clerk said no, and the nervous mother left in a 1990 Mitsubishi Eclipse. A customer reportedly said he also saw a woman resembling Cheryl in the shop, as well as a blue Mitsubishi 20 minutes earlier in front of a payphone at the Get and Go convenience store at East Republic Road and Charleston Avenue. Friends of Levitt noted that it would have been quite an uncharacteristic move from the hairdresser, as she wasn't the type of person who would rush out in the middle of the night to look for her daughter without first contacting the home where Susie promised to be. She never called the Kirby residence, but it is unclear if Suzanne ever informed her mother that their plans had changed and they wouldn't stay in Branson in the first place. The hosts also stated Levitt never investigated the parties the 2 girls attended. Another noteworthy theory is that whatever happened on East Delmar Street, their abduction might not have occurred by coincidence on the evening of the graduation parties, because literally everyone in the city and surrounding area was aware of the celebrations. As a result, the person responsible for their disappearance could have known that Cheryl would be alone at home that night. Susie had a habit of arriving home late or sleeping somewhere else, so it's possible that the kidnapper saw the girls leaving for the graduation celebration and decided to take action. But given the chaotic nature of the entire night, which was full of random and unforeseen changes, it could also have been a crime of opportunity. It cannot be ruled out that their abductor picked them out on their way home or during the alleged restaurant visit and waited until they arrived home. And if the police's otherwise quite likely theory turns out to be true, then the person could have waited outside until the house went silent. This is where we must discuss one of the most recent suspects, serial killer Larry Dwayne Hall, a fanatic of the American Revolution and the Civil War. He was born on December 11, 1962, in Wabash, Indiana, and was 29 years old at the time of the disappearances. He spent his first few days in a neonatal intensive care unit due to lack of oxygen after his identical twin brother Gary fed on him in the womb in a monochorionic pregnancy. According to Radford University's Department of Psychology's research, Hall was already antisocial at Westward Elementary School and had a very low IQ of 85. Except for English and history, he struggled academically and was frequently bullied at school for being slower than the other kids, as well as for his nightmares, speech impediment, and bedwetting. At the age of 12, Hall began digging graves with his abusive alcoholic father, who worked at Wabash's Falls Cemetery, which desensitized him to the presence of human cadavers and resulted in him stealing valuables from the coffins. When they were 15, the Hall brothers were arrested for smashing the windows of a downtown storefront. In the 1970s and 1980s, he was suspected of committing arson, vandalism, and petty crimes throughout his hometown. His first possible victim was 14-year-old Dean Marie Pyle Peters, who disappeared from Forest Hills Central Middle School in Grand Rapids, Michigan, on February 5, 1981. Larry Hall is believed to be her abductor, and the young girl hasn't been found to this day. Experts suspect Hall could be potentially responsible for the deaths and disappearances of over 50 women across 13 states, including the Springfield Three. Despite his brother's efforts to be a positive influence and travel together across the Midwest to attend battle reenactments, Larry allegedly attempted to kill him several times. Gary later claimed that Larry's Civil War guise was a way to cover his lack of personal hygiene and to act upon his violent urges. He usually dressed as a Union soldier and traveled to the reenactments with a similar van wanted in the Springfield disappearances. The twin brother even asserted that Larry Hall confessed to the trio's murder and said he was stalking one of the girls that night. He allegedly said in an interview that, "All of my victims have the same face, and many of them resembled Stacy McCall." It is believed that the serial killer murdered many of his victims because they reminded him of Gary's ex-wife, and he was angry that his brother devoted his life to this woman and not to him anymore. Coincidentally, on June 6th and 7th, 1992, a battle reenactment was held 1.2 miles west of Pleasant Hope, about 20 miles north of Springfield, as part of Old Settlers' celebration. It is a highly suspicious and scary detail found by the Unmasked True Crime Channel. Pleasant Hope was in the middle of nowhere, and once somebody decided to travel south toward Springfield to grab some food or refuel, they would have to take Highway H and then Route 65, which cuts through the city, right next to Cheryl Levitt's house. The man confessed to dozens of murders throughout the years, but recanted all of them. He was an opportunistic murderer who picked girls randomly, lured them out, and left no traces in their homes. It's possible that through a series of unfortunate events, the two Springfield teenagers somehow crossed his path that night. The previously mentioned Kathy Baird wrote in a 2012 blog post that Hall claims that his twin brother Gary Wayne Hall and another man allegedly kidnapped and killed Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy, and then dumped their bodies in the Mark Twain National Forest between 30 and 90 miles of Cheryl's house. Below the post, an anonymous user commented about a terrifying encounter in the woods that happened in 1992. He wrote that he was 15 at the time and was visiting a family member in Missouri. One night he snuck out with a friend to Camp Winoka who wanted to show him it was haunted. According to the legend, Camp Winoka or Winoka Lodge is an abandoned Girl Scout camp on the shores of Lake Springfield, where a group of Girl Scouts were brutally murdered. However, this is most likely a made-up story, as there is no evidence that such a camp in Springfield where Girl Scouts were murdered ever existed. Nevertheless, the user claims that around 4 in the morning, he and his friend Chuck were deep in the woods when suddenly, a van appeared out of nowhere. 3 men exited the vehicle, along with 3 scared and shirtless women. The men killed one of them almost instantly, and the others screamed madly and were sexually assaulted. The 2 boys remained in the bushes for about 4 hours, because the van did not leave until near daylight. They thought the two women were still alive when the men put them inside the van before driving away. Once again, this is an anonymous comment and cannot be verified whether it's true or not. Police have reportedly investigated all the new tips, but Larry Hall refused to talk to officers. He is currently serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole in a federal prison in Butner, North Carolina, for the 1993 kidnapping and murder of schoolgirl Jessica Roach, whose body was found in a cornfield. The man certainly fits the picture, and his modus operandi matches the circumstances of the Springfield Three's disappearance. Yet, no evidence links Larry Hall to the case, or suggests that he was in Springfield in the early hours of June 7, 1992. Cheryl Levitt, her daughter Susie Streeter, and her friend Stacy McCall have not been found to this day. The former two were declared dead in 1997 after the 5-year legal mark, but Stacy was not, as her family refuses to do so until her body is found. The two graduates were last seen alive when they left Janelle's house. Her mother, Kathy Kirby, was already in bed when she heard Susie telling Stacy, "Follow me to my house." "Okay, I will," she responded. Janelle and Kathy then watched them drive away. Janelle later married Mike after their 1995 engagement, but she will never forget that mild summer night when she lost her two best friends. Debbie Schwartz, Cheryl's sister, later said, "It doesn't feel like 10 years. The pain feels fresh and new. It's amazing it can feel so new after so long. I'm sure it will be that way until my dying day." In June 1997, a bench was dedicated to the women inside the Victims' Memorial Garden in Springfield's Phelps Grove Park, and the McCalls created an organization called One Missing Link to help families whose loved ones are missing. "It's hard to be known for something you didn't do as opposed to something you did do," said retired Sergeant David Asher, who led the investigation in the early days. I think of it all the time. I want it to be solved. I want it for Janice and Stu McCall, the Streeters, the police department, and I want it for the community. I think they need it," he added. The case went cold in the mid-90s because no new leads were promising, and police announced in 1997 that they couldn't justify the money and manpower to continue working it even on a part-time basis. The other part of the story is that officers said later that sometimes it felt like Police Chief Terry Knowles didn't have confidence in them, micromanaged things, and didn't let detectives do their job. Some said the chief personally ruled out key suspects who investigators believed had a motive to abduct the women. Daryl Moore said, "This was clearly the most micromanaged case I've ever seen. Seasoned detectives were not allowed to use their experience and judgment in this investigation. This is the only case where that happened, and I don't understand that." Regarding this, Knowles, who had originally come from the FBI and was trained for such major investigations, told the Springfield News Leader in 2002, "I don't recall that being an issue back then. What anyone wants to say 10 years later, I can't control that. It's certainly disappointing, and it's frustrating at the time to be doing everything you possibly can." Perhaps the unprecedented and mounting pressure ruined the atmosphere in the office, because without a doubt, it was one of the most extensive and expensive investigations in Springfield's history. Police spokeswoman Lisa Cox said in an interview in 2015, "The case has never been suspended and has always been assigned to at least one of our detectives who follows up on the ongoing incoming tips." So their absurd disappearance went unattended except for incoming leads, and the case files of the Springfield Three are still officially filed under missing, and what happened to them on that June evening remains a mystery.